My name is Victoria, and I'm 22 years old. Today should have been the proudest day of my life. I was the first in my family to graduate college, wearing my cap and gown, ready to receive my diploma. Then I heard my mother's voice cut through the applause. "I wish you'd just disappear." I froze on that stage, feeling everyone's eyes on me. In that moment, I made a decision that changed everything. If you've ever had someone try to dim your light on your brightest day, then you know exactly how I felt. Let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button as I share how I walked off stage but still managed to win the day. I grew up in Lakeside, a small town in Ohio where everyone knew everyone. Our modest 2-story house on Maple Street was where I spent my childhood trying to meet my mother Margaret's impossible standards. From an early age, I understood that nothing I did would ever be enough for her. My father left when I was just 6 years old. I remember that rainy Tuesday morning when he kissed my forehead, promising to call soon. Those calls became less frequent until they stopped altogether. With him gone, my mother's attention focused entirely on me, and not in a good way. Margaret Porter was known throughout Lakeside for her perfectly manicured lawn, her position as head of the PTA, and her cutting remarks. She worked as an accountant at the local credit union, and precision was her religion. Everything in our house had its place. Dinner was served at 6 sharp every evening. Homework was to be completed before television could be watched. And achievements were to be practical, measurable, and impressive to the neighbours. "Victoria, straighten your posture. No one respects a woman who slouches," she would say in the grocery store, pushing her finger painfully into my spine. "An A-, what happened to the other 5 points?" she would ask when I proudly showed her my report card. When I was 8, I won 2nd place in the school art contest with a watercolour painting of our backyard garden. I ran home clutching my red ribbon bursting through the front door to show my mother. "2nd place is just the first loser," she said, barely glancing at my artwork before returning to her spreadsheets. "Next time, focus on something that could actually earn you a scholarship." Things changed slightly when my brother Tyler was born when I was 9. Suddenly, I wasn't the only focus of her critical eye, but it soon became clear that different standards applied to us. Where my B+ in math warranted a week of extra study sessions, Tyler's C- was met with, "Boys just develop their mathematical skills later." While my mother nitpicked every detail of my appearance, Tyler was allowed to leave the house with untied shoelaces and mismatched socks. "He's a boy," she would explain with a shrug. "No one notices these things with boys." Public humiliation was my mother's favourite form of control. At my 10th birthday party, she announced to all my friends that I still occasionally wet the bed. I didn't. During my middle school choir concert, she loudly complained to the parents around her that I was singing off-key. I wasn't. At my 16th birthday dinner, she told the waiter not to bring dessert because Victoria is already developing quite a tummy. Each time I would feel my face burn with shame, but I never confronted her. Instead, I channeled all my energy into school. Books became my escape, and academic success my rebellion. If I could just achieve enough, maybe I would finally earn her approval. Maybe she would finally see me. When college acceptance letters started arriving during my senior year of high school, I was ecstatic to receive an offer from Westlake University, 300 miles away from home. It wasn't an Ivy League school, but it had an excellent psychology program that had immediately captured my interest. "Psychology," my mother scoffed when I told her. "What kind of stable career will that lead to? You should be applying for business programs, or at least something practical like nursing." "I want to help people understand themselves better," I tried to explain. "To heal from their past." "People should help themselves," she replied dismissively. "And healing is for the weak." Despite her discouragement, I accepted Westlake's offer. The distance from home was as much a selling point as the academic program. For the first time in my life, I saw a path to freedom opening before me. The night before I left for college, I overheard my mother talking to Tyler in the kitchen. "At least I still have one child with sense," she said. "Victoria has always been too sensitive, too dreamy, just like her father." It was the first comparison to my father that wasn't explicitly negative, and somehow that hurt even more. I packed the last of my belongings with tears streaming down my face, but also with determination burning in my chest. I would prove her wrong. I would succeed on my own terms. As I drove away from Lakeside the next morning, watching my childhood home disappear in the rearview mirror, I felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration. I had no idea what awaited me at Westlake University, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever it was, it had to be better than what I was leaving behind. The drive to Westlake University took 5 hours, but it felt like crossing into another world. Campus was buzzing with activity. When I arrived, students carrying boxes into dorms, parents taking photos, new friendships already forming on the sprawling green lawns between red brick buildings. I checked in at Hamilton Hall and received my room key, student ID, and a welcome packet. My room was on the 3rd floor, a standard double with simple furniture and bare walls just waiting to be personalised. I had arrived before my roommate, so I took the liberty of choosing the bed near the window. I was carefully arranging my modest collection of books when the door burst open and in walked a girl with bright purple hair, arms full of plants, and the biggest smile I'd ever seen. "You must be Victoria, I'm Jasmine Martinez," she said, dropping her plants onto the empty desk and extending her hand. "Sorry about the jungle. I promise they're all easy care and won't take over your side of the room." There was something immediately disarming about Jasmine's openness that made me feel at ease. Within an hour, we had covered the basics. She was from Arizona, studying environmental science, loved indie rock, and had never met a plant she couldn't save. She asked questions about me too, and for the first time, I found myself talking about my interests without fear of judgment. "Psychology, huh? That's awesome," Jasmine said, when I reluctantly mentioned my major. "My aunt is a therapist, and she says it's the most rewarding work she's ever done." I waited for the follow-up, the inevitable, "But what will you do with that degree?" that always came from my mother. It never came. Instead, Jasmine asked what areas of psychology interested me most, and I found myself talking animatedly about developmental psychology and trauma recovery. That first week of college was both overwhelming and exhilarating. I attended orientation events, signed up for clubs, got lost trying to find my classrooms, and slowly began to realize that no one here knew me as Margaret's odd daughter. I could be anyone I wanted. My first psychology class was Introduction to Psychological Science, with Professor Davis, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and a reputation for being brilliant but demanding. From the first lecture, I was captivated. Professor Davis spoke about the human mind with such passion and clarity that I left class each day with my head buzzing with new ideas. 2 weeks into the semester, my phone rang. It was my mother calling for the 3rd time that day. "Victoria, why haven't you answered my calls?" she demanded without greeting. "I was in class, Mum. I told you my schedule in the email I sent last week." "Well, I need to know what you're eating. You know you gain weight easily. And have you joined any professional organisations yet? Your cousin Emily joined 3 clubs her first week at State." And just like that, the confidence I had been building crumbled. I found myself hunched over by Kusa, making myself smaller, as if she could see me through the phone. "I joined the Psychology Students Association," I said quietly, "and I'm eating at the dining hall. The food is actually pretty healthy." "The psychology whatever," she scoffed. "I've been talking to Diane Jenkins. You know she's on the board at the credit union. Her daughter is in pre-law at Westlake. You should reach out to her. Maybe she can talk some sense into you about this psychology nonsense." The conversation continued in this vein for another 20 minutes. By the time we hung up, I felt drained and small again. Jasmine, who had been pretending not to listen while watering her plants, looked at me with concern. "Your mum seems intense," she said carefully. "That's one word for it," I replied, trying to smile. "She has very specific ideas about what success looks like." "And what do you think success looks like?" Jasmine asked. The question startled me. No one had ever asked me that before. Over the next few months, I began to create a life for myself at Westlake. I excelled in my classes, particularly those taught by Professor Davis. I made friends in my dorm and in the Psychology Students Association. I even went on a few dates, though. Nothing serious developed. But my mother remained a constant shadow. She called daily, sometimes multiple times. When I didn't answer, she left voicemails that oscillated between guilt trips and thinly veiled threats to show up unannounced. And then 3 months into my freshman year, she did exactly that. I was studying in the library when I got a text from Jasmine. "Your mum is in our room. She doesn't look happy." I found my mother sitting on my bed, rifling through my desk drawer. She looked up when I entered, her face a mask of disapproval. "Your roommate let me in," she said. "This place is a mess, Victoria. And what are these?" She held up a brochure for a summer research program in child development. "It's a research opportunity I'm considering," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "More psychology nonsense," she sighed. "I've been talking to Dean Wilson in the business school. He agreed to meet with you about transferring programs." "I'm not transferring, Mum. I love my major." What followed was a 2-hour argument that left me in tears and Jasmine fleeing to a friend's room to give us privacy. My mother eventually left, but not before informing me that she was gravely disappointed in my choices. That night, lying in bed with swollen eyes, I made a decision. I would limit my contact with my mother. I would screen her calls, responding only to texts, and only when I felt emotionally prepared to do so. I would not allow her to visit without advance notice, and most importantly, I would not allow her disapproval to define me anymore. The next day, I applied for a part-time job at the campus bookstore. The pay wasn't much, but it was a start toward financial independence. I also made an appointment with Professor Davis during her office hours to discuss the summer research program. Professor Davis turned out to be more than just an inspiring teacher. She became a mentor, someone who saw potential in me that had nothing to do with meeting someone else's expectations. "You have a natural empathy, Victoria," she told me during one of our meetings, "and a keen, analytical mind. Those qualities will serve you well in this field." By the end of freshman year, I had changed my major from general psychology to clinical psychology without telling my mother. I had secured the summer research position, which came with a small stipend that meant I didn't have to return home for the break. I had begun to build a life that was truly mine. Of course, my mother found out about the major change when the university sent full registration information to her email. She was still the primary contact on my financial aid forms. The phone call that followed was explosive, but something had shifted in me. I stood my ground. "This is my life, Mom," I said firmly. "I'm sorry you're disappointed, but I'm making this decision for me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then in a dangerously quiet voice she said, "We'll see how far that attitude takes you when your tuition bill comes due." It was a threat she couldn't fully execute thanks to my scholarships, but it was enough to make the next 3 years a financial struggle. I took out additional student loans. I worked extra shifts at the bookstore. I applied for every grant and scholarship I could find. Sometimes I ate ramen for days straight to make ends meet. But through it all, I was building something precious confidence in my own judgment, friends like Jasmine who valued me for exactly who I was, professional relationships with professors who saw my potential, a future that excited me even if it terrified my mother. By senior year, I had secured a prestigious internship at a trauma recovery center in Chicago that would begin after graduation. I had been accepted to 3 graduate programs, all with partial funding. I had presented original research at 2 undergraduate conferences. I had grown into someone I was proud to be, and as graduation approached, a small stubborn part of me still hoped that my mother would finally see it too, that she would finally be proud of what I had accomplished, even if it wasn't the path she would have chosen for me. That hope was why, despite everything, I sent her and Tyler an invitation to my graduation ceremony. That hope was why, when she actually RSVP'd, yes, I spent hours planning a perfect graduation weekend that might finally bridge the gap between us. That hope was why when everything fell apart on graduation day, the pain cut so deep. The week leading up to graduation was a whirlwind of activity. Final exams, clearing out my apartment, saying goodbye to friends, and preparing for the ceremony itself. Despite the chaos, I found myself oddly calm. 4 years of hard work were culminating in this moment, and I was ready. I had reserved a hotel room for my mother and Tyler, who was now 14 and in his freshman year of high school. They were scheduled to arrive Friday evening, the day before the Saturday morning ceremony. I planned a dinner at Vincenzo's, the nicest restaurant in town, as a way to start the weekend on a positive note. When they still hadn't arrived by 7 p.m, I called my mother. "We're running late," she said, road noise in the background. Tyler had a baseball game that went into extra innings. I couldn't pull him from such an important match. "We'll be there in about 2 hours. I rescheduled our dinner reservation for 9:30, ignoring the twist of disappointment in my stomach. Tyler's activities had always taken precedence over mine, but surely this weekend would be different. This was my college graduation after all. They finally arrived at the hotel around 9:15, both looking tired from the drive. My mother greeted me with her customary cheek ear kiss, while Tyler gave me an awkward half hug that reminded me how much he'd grown since I'd last seen him at Christmas. "The room is adequate," my mother said, surveying the standard hotel accommodations I'd stretched my budget to afford. "Though I'm surprised you didn't book at the Westlake Inn. The Jenkins family is staying there." This was what I could manage, I said, choosing not to mention that the Westlake Inn cost 3 times as much. "Are you both hungry? Our dinner reservation is in 15 minutes. "Starving," Tyler said, perking up. Dinner started pleasantly enough. The restaurant was buzzing with other families celebrating graduation, and the atmosphere was festive. Tyler talked excitedly about his baseball team making regionals, and I genuinely enjoyed hearing about his successes. Then my mother started asking about my plans after graduation. "So this internship in Chicago," she said, swirling her wine glass. "What exactly will you be doing? Fetching coffee for real psychologists." I took a deep breath before answering. "It's actually a clinical position, Mom. I'll be assisting with group therapy sessions for trauma survivors under supervision and helping to collect data for their outcomes research program." She said dismissively. "And the pay? It's a stipend," I admitted. "Not much, but enough to cover a shared apartment and basic expenses. Plus the experience is invaluable for graduate school applications." "So you'll be poor," she translated. Diane's daughter Rachel just accepted a position at Turner Consulting. Starting salary of $65,000 plus benefits. "I'm not Rachel," I said, feeling my calm facade beginning to crack. "And money isn't my primary goal." "Clearly," she replied. "I just worry about your future, Victoria. You're 22 now. It's time to get serious about building a stable life." "I am serious," I insisted. "Psychology is a respected field with good career prospects, especially with a graduate degree. Which will put you in how much additional debt?" she asked pointedly. The conversation continued to deteriorate from there. By dessert, we were barely speaking, and Tyler was looking increasingly uncomfortable, staring intently at his chocolate cake, as if it might provide an escape route. Back at the hotel, I tried one more time to connect with my mother. "I'm really glad you came, Mom. It means a lot to me that you'll be there tomorrow." She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Of course I came. I'm your mother. It's what's expected." Not, "I wouldn't miss it." Not, "I'm proud of you." Just, "It's what's expected." I left their hotel room with a heavy heart, but told myself that tomorrow would be different. Surely seeing me walk across that stage would finally make her proud. I returned to my nearly empty apartment and called Jasmine, who had graduated the previous semester and was flying in for my ceremony. "How's it going with your mum?" she asked immediately. "About as well as could be expected," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "She's being herself." "Remember what we talked about," Jasmine said firmly. "This is your day, your achievement. Don't let her take that from you." I fell asleep repeating those words like a mantra. This is my day, my achievement. The morning of graduation dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring day. I put on the new dress I had bought for the occasion, carefully did my makeup, and placed my cap and gown on my bed, still wrapped in plastic. Jasmine had arrived late the previous night and was now helping me pin my hair so the cap would sit properly. "You look beautiful," she said, giving my shoulders a squeeze. "Professor Davis will be looking for you before the ceremony, by the way. She said she has something for you." I checked my phone. 2 texts from my mother. "What time do we need to be in our seats? And is parking included in the hotel rate? Or do we need to pay separately?" Nothing about how I was feeling. Nothing about being proud. But I pushed those thoughts away. Today was my day. I arranged to meet my mother and Tyler at the auditorium an hour before the ceremony. When I arrived in my cap and gown, they were nowhere to be found. I waited, checking my phone repeatedly, growing increasingly anxious, as other graduates streamed past with their families, taking photos and receiving hugs. Finally, with just 20 minutes until we needed to line up, they appeared. My mother was wearing a beige pantsuit that seemed deliberately understated, while Tyler trailed behind her in khakis and a polo shirt, looking bored. "The parking situation is abysmal," my mother complained by way of greeting. "We had to park 3 blocks away." "I'm sorry about that," I said automatically, "but I'm glad you made it. Do you want to take some pictures before I have to line up?" My mother glanced at her watch. "I suppose we have time for 1 or 2. The photos were awkward, my smile feeling increasingly strained as my mother critiqued every pose. "Stand up straighter, Victoria. Tyler, move closer to your sister. Victoria, can't you do something about how that cap sits on your head?" Finally, I spotted Professor Davis in the crowd and excused myself. "I need to check in with my advisor before we start. I'll see you both after the ceremony." Professor Davis enveloped me in a warm hug when I reached her. "Victoria, don't you look wonderful?" A sin. She pressed a small gift box into my hands. "Just a little something to mark the occasion. Open it later when you have time." "Thank you," I said, feeling a lump form in my throat at her kindness. "For everything. I wouldn't be here without your guidance." "Nonsense," she replied with a smile. "You did the work. I just pointed out opportunities you were more than qualified for. Now they'll be calling for line-up soon. Go make me proud out there." With those words buoying my spirits, I joined the other graduates in the holding area. We were arranged alphabetically, and I found my place in the P section, exchanging excited greetings with classmates I'd spent 4 years alongside. The ceremony began with all the traditional pomp and circumstance. We processed into the auditorium to pomp and circumstance, the audience applauding as we filed in. From my position, I couldn't see where my mother and Tyler were seated, but I imagined them watching as I walked in, perhaps finally feeling some pride. The university president welcomed everyone. The commencement speaker, a Westlake alumna who had gone on to become a renowned neurosurgeon, gave an inspiring address about finding purpose. And then it was time for the conferring of degrees. As the graduates before me received their diplomas, I felt a growing sense of anticipation. This was the moment I had worked toward for 4 years. The moment I hoped would finally earn my mother's approval. "Victoria Porter, Bachelor of Science in Psychology cum laude," the dean announced. I walked across the stage, heart pounding with pride and nervousness. I shook the president's hand, accepted my diploma holder, and turned to smile for the official photograph. And that's when I heard it, my mother's voice cutting through the polite applause like a knife. "I wish you'd just disappear." The words hung in the air, shockingly clear, in a moment of relative quiet between names being called. I froze, diploma in hand, searching the audience in disbelief. Several rows back, I spotted her standing with an expression of pure disgust, Tyler beside her, looking mortified. Time seemed to stop. I was vaguely aware of confused murmurs from the audience of the dean, looking uncertainly at me of the next graduate waiting to be called. In that moment, something inside me broke, but something else, something stronger took its place. Without thinking further, I walked off the stage. Not back to my seat, but toward a side exit. I pushed through the door and found myself in a quiet hallway, my breathing, ragged diploma clutched to my chest like a shield. I leaned against the wall, legs suddenly weak, and slid down until I was sitting on the floor, graduation gown pulled around me. The enormity of what had just happened hit me all at once. My mother had publicly humiliated me at my college graduation. The day I had worked so hard for, dreamed of for so long, she had tainted with her cruelty. Tears filled my eyes, but before they could fall, the door opened. I expected to see an usher, or perhaps another graduate, but it was Jasmine. "Vicky," she said softly, crouching beside me. "I saw what happened. I'm so sorry." "She's never going to be proud of me," I whispered. "Nothing I ever do will be enough." Jasmine took my hands in hers. "Listen to me. What she thinks doesn't matter. What you've accomplished, who you've become, that's what matters. And speaking as someone who's watched you grow these past 4 years, you are incredible." I took a shaky breath. "I don't know what to do now." "What do you want to do?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. I thought about all the times my mother had made me feel small, all the times I had allowed her disapproval to diminish my achievements. I thought about Professor Davis telling me to go make her proud. I thought about the years of work that had earned me the diploma in my hands. "I want to finish my graduation," I said, rising to my feet. "I want to walk back in there with my head held high. I want my moment." Jasmine smiled. "Then let's fix your cap and get you back in there." I stood at the auditorium door, my cap straightened, my eyes clear, and my resolve firm. The graduates were still receiving their diplomas, the ceremony continuing despite my abrupt exit. Through the small window in the door, I could see that they were only a few letters past P in the alphabet. "You can do this," Jasmine whispered beside me. "I'll be right here cheering for you." I nodded, took a deep breath, and pushed the door open. A few heads turned as I walked in, but most attention remained focused on the stage. I slipped into an empty seat in the back row of graduates, receiving confused but supportive smiles from classmates who had noticed my return. As the last graduate received their diploma, the dean announced that anyone who had missed their name being called should come to the stage after the ceremony to receive their diploma. My official moment had passed, but I was determined to claim what I had earned. When the ceremony concluded and the recessional music began, I stood with the other graduates. Instead of following them out, however, I made my way toward the stage where a small line was forming for those who needed to collect their diplomas. "Victoria Porter," I said clearly to the administrator managing the process. I walked off stage earlier. The woman looked at me with surprising kindness. "Yes, I remember. I have your diploma right here." She handed me the leather-bound certificate. "Congratulations." "Thank you," I said, holding it tightly. "I worked very hard for this." "And it shows," she replied. "Cum laude is no small achievement." With my diploma properly in hand, I turned to face the dispersing crowd. Families were gathering with their graduates, taking photos, offering hugs and gifts. I spotted Jasmine waving to me from near the exit and began making my way toward her. That's when I saw my mother and Tyler standing in the reception area just outside the auditorium doors. My mother was checking her watch impatiently while Tyler scanned the crowd, presumably looking for me. I had a choice in that moment. I could avoid them, slip away with Jasmine, and deal with the fallout later. Or I could confront the situation head-on. I chose confrontation. Walking directly toward them, diploma held proudly in my hand, I watched as Tyler spotted me first. His eyes widened and he tugged on our mother's sleeve. She turned, her expression a mixture of impatience and disdain. "Finally," she said as I approached. "We've been waiting for 20 minutes. See, that little display of yours was completely unnecessary. You always did have a flair for drama." "A display?" I repeated, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "You shouted that you wished I would disappear in front of hundreds of people on what should have been one of the proudest days of my life." "I did no such thing," she replied dismissively. "I simply expressed my frustration at how long this tedious ceremony was taking. If you chose to run off stage like a petulant child, that's hardly my fault." Tyler shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Mom, I heard what you said. It was pretty clear." My mother shot him a warning glance, but the fact that my brother had actually spoken up in my defense gave me courage. "For 4 years," I said, no longer bothering to keep my voice down, "I have worked toward this degree. I have earned scholarships, maintained a 3.8 GPA, secured a competitive internship, and been accepted to graduate programs. I did all of this largely without your support, emotional or financial." People nearby were beginning to notice our confrontation. A few families paused in their celebrations to watch. "That degree," my mother said with a sniff, pointing to my diploma, "is hardly worth the paper it's printed on. Psychology, what kind of career will you have, listening to people whine about their problems all day?" "I will be helping people heal from trauma," I replied firmly. "People like me who grew up with parents who made them feel worthless, who were taught that their own feelings and desires didn't matter, who were publicly humiliated as a means of control." My mother's face flushed with anger. "How dare you speak to me this way, after all I've done for you? What exactly have you done for me, Mom? Made me doubt myself at every turn, undermined my choices, tried to force me into a life that would have made me miserable, just so you could brag to your friends." By now our argument had drawn quite an audience. I could see people watching with expressions ranging from discomfort to open support for me. Tyler had taken a step away from our mother, his face red with embarrassment. "Victoria!" Professor Davis's voice came from behind me, and I turned to see her approaching with a concerned expression. "Is everything all right here?" "Professor Davis," I said, managing a smile, "I'd like to introduce you to my mother, Margaret Porter. Mom, this is Professor Davis, my advisor and mentor." Professor Davis extended her hand, which my mother reluctantly shook. "Mrs. Porter, you must be so proud. Victoria has been one of our department's standout students. Her research on childhood resilience factors shows remarkable insight. We're all expecting great things from her." My mother's face tightened into what I recognized as her public mask, the one she wore when she needed to maintain appearances. "Of course," she said stiffly. "Victoria has always been determined." "More than determined," Professor Davis corrected gently. "Brilliant, compassionate. Exactly the kind of person we need in this field." She turned to me. "Several of us faculty are having a small reception for our graduates at Riverside Cafe. We'd be honored if you and your family would join us." Before my mother could respond, I said, "Thank you, Professor. I'd love to come." Then I turned to my mother and brother. "You're welcome to join, or if you prefer, we can meet up later at your hotel before you drive back." My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "I think we'll pass on the reception. Tyler has homework to complete before Monday." She glanced around at the people still watching us. "We should be going." "All right," I agreed. "I'll come by the hotel later to say goodbye." As she turned to leave, practically dragging Tyler along, I called after her. "Mum?" She paused but didn't turn around. "I won't be disappearing. Not today, not ever again." She stiffened visibly before continuing toward the exit, her steps quick and angry. Tyler glanced back at me over his shoulder, giving me a small secret thumbs up that made my heart ache for him. When they were gone, Professor Davis touched my arm gently. "Are you okay?" "I am," I said, realizing with some surprise that it was true. For the first time in a very long time, I think I really am. Jasmine appeared at my side, linking her arm through mine. "That was amazing," she whispered. "I've never seen anyone stand up to a parent like that." "Neither have I," said Professor Davis with a smile. "Now shall we go celebrate properly? You've certainly earned it." Walking out of the auditorium between these two women who had shown me what genuine support looked like, diploma in hand and head held high, I felt something I hadn't expected: freedom. My mother's words could no longer diminish me. Her disapproval no longer defined me. I had walked off that stage, but I had returned stronger. I had finally learned to be the author of my own story. The hours following graduation became a celebration I hadn't dared to hope for. Professor Davis's reception at Riverside Cafe was intimate and warm, with about 20 psychology graduates and our favourite faculty members. There were toasts, heartfelt advice for our futures, and so much genuine pride in our accomplishments that it nearly overwhelmed me. "To Victoria," Professor Davis said, raising her glass during one toast, "whose resilience and compassion will change lives. We can't wait to see what you do next." The validation I had so desperately sought from my mother for years was here all along, from mentors and friends who actually saw me for who I was. After the reception, Jasmine and several other friends insisted we continue celebrating. We went to the rooftop, a popular bar near campus, where more graduates were gathered. For a few hours, I allowed myself to simply enjoy the moment, to laugh and dance and be young. It wasn't until my phone buzzed around 8 p.m. that reality intruded. A text from Tyler. "Mom's really mad. Says if you're not back at the hotel by 9, we're leaving without saying goodbye." I showed the message to Jasmine, who rolled her eyes. "She's still trying to control you even now." "I know," I sighed, "but I should at least say goodbye to Tyler." "Want me to come with you?" she offered. "No," I said after a moment's thought. "This is something I need to handle alone." When I arrived at the hotel at 8:55 p.m, I found my mother already loading their bags into the car. Tyler sat in the passenger seat looking miserable. "So you decided to show up?" my mother said coldly when I approached. "I said I would," I replied. "I wanted to say goodbye to Tyler." "Fine, make it quick. We have a long drive ahead of us." I walked to the passenger side, where Tyler rolled down his window. "Hey, graduate," he said with a small smile. "Hey, freshman," I replied, bending to hug him awkwardly through the window. "Take care of yourself, okay, and call me sometime. I mean it." "I will," he promised quietly. "What you did today was cool." I felt tears threatening, but blinked them away. "Thanks, Ty. That means a lot." My mother cleared her throat impatiently. I straightened and turned to her. "Drive safely," I said formally. "Victoria," she began, her voice slightly less harsh. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, or at least acknowledge what had happened. Instead, she said, "When this psychology phase has run its course and you're ready to pursue something sensible, let me know." The familiar disappointment washed over me, but this time it didn't cut as deep. "This isn't a phase, Mom. This is my career, my passion. I hope someday you can accept that." She didn't respond, just walked around to the driver's side and got in. As they drove away, Tyler turned to wave goodbye through the rear window. I waved back until their taillights disappeared around a corner. Standing alone in the hotel parking lot, I realized something important. I didn't need my mother's approval anymore. The constant ache for her validation had defined so much of my life, but today I had begun to let it go. 2 days later, I accepted the internship offer in Chicago. A week after that, I packed everything I owned into my used Honda Civic and said goodbye to the town that had been my home for 4 transformative years. Professor Davis hugged me tightly on my last visit to campus. "You're going to be just fine," she told me. "Better than fine. And if you ever need a recommendation for graduate school or just want to talk, I'm always here." Jasmine helped me load the last of my belongings into my car. "Chicago won't know what hit it," she said, wiping away tears. "Promise you'll visit me in Boston." "Promise," I said, hugging her fiercely. "I wouldn't have survived these 4 years without you." As I drove toward Chicago and my new life, I thought about my mother's words. "I wish you'd just disappear." Maybe in some ways, the daughter she had tried to create, the version of me that existed only to fulfill her expectations, was finally disappearing. But the real me, the Victoria who had found her voice and her purpose, was just beginning to appear. The studio apartment I had rented in Chicago was tiny, in an old building with temperamental plumbing and neighbors who played music too loudly on weekends. But it was mine, paid for with my internship stipend and some careful budgeting. I arranged my few pieces of furniture, hung curtains, and placed my framed diploma prominently on the wall. My first day at the Trauma Recovery Centre was overwhelming but exhilarating. The clinical director, Dr. Winters, was demanding but supportive. The clients were diverse in age and background, but united by their courage in confronting their painful histories. "What brought you to trauma work specifically?" Dr. Winters asked during our first supervision session. I hesitated, then decided on honesty. I grew up with emotional abuse. Nothing that would have warranted intervention, but constant criticism, public humiliation, manipulation. I know what it's like to have your sense of self systematically undermined by someone who's supposed to care for you. Dr. Winters nodded thoughtfully. Our own wounds often guide us to our purpose, if we're brave enough to look at them directly. Just make sure you're doing your own healing work alongside this career. We can't effectively help others heal wounds we're actively bleeding from ourselves. Taking her advice to heart, I found a therapist who specialized in family trauma. Every Wednesday evening, I spent an hour with Dr. Chen unpacking my childhood and the patterns it had created in my adult life. It was painful work bringing buried memories to the surface, acknowledging the depth of the hurt my mother had caused. But it was necessary work too. Meanwhile, my mother's attempts to maintain control continued, though, at a distance. She called less frequently than during college, but when she did, the conversations followed familiar patterns. "That neighborhood you're living in sounds dangerous," she'd say. "Rachel Jenkins just bought a condo in Lincoln Park. Her parents helped with the down payment, of course." "My neighborhood is fine, Mom," I'd reply, increasingly immune to the comparison. "Have you considered applying for that marketing position at Tyler's school? The salary would be much better than what you're making now." "I'm happy with my work, Mom. It's fulfilling and it's leading me where I want to go professionally." The most difficult call came 3 months after I'd moved to Chicago. My mother phoned on a Sunday evening, her voice unusually tentative. "Victoria, I've been thinking about what happened at your graduation." My heart skipped a beat. Was this finally going to be the apology I'd given up expecting? "Yes," I prompted when she paused. "It wasn't my finest moment," she admitted. "But you have to understand, I've only ever wanted what's best for you. Seeing you throw away your potential on this psychology thing has been difficult for me." And there it was, the non-apology that somehow made it all my fault. Once upon a time, I would have accepted it, grateful for even this crumb of acknowledgement. Now I recognized it for what it was, another manipulation. "Mom," I said carefully, "what happened at graduation wasn't about my career choice. It was about you publicly expressing that you wished I didn't exist. That goes far beyond disapproving of my major." "That's not what I meant," she protested. "You always were sensitive, taking things the wrong way." "I took it exactly the way you meant it," I replied. "And until you're ready to take responsibility for your words and actions, I think it's best if we limit our contact." The silence that followed was charged with disbelief. My mother had never faced such direct boundary setting from me before. "I see," she finally said, her voice cold again. "If that's how you feel. Don't come crying to me when this little independent life of yours falls apart." "It won't," I said with quiet confidence. "Goodbye, Mom." I didn't cut contact completely. I still exchanged occasional texts with Tyler, sent obligatory holiday cards, and answered my mother's calls perhaps once a month. But I no longer sought her approval or allowed her criticisms to affect me. The months passed, turning into a full year since graduation. My internship was coming to an end, and I had been accepted to a graduate program in clinical psychology that would begin in the fall. Dr. Winters had offered me a part-time position at the centre to help support me through my studies. My therapy with Dr. Chen had helped me recognize and begin to heal the wounds of my childhood. I was building a life on my terms, brick by careful brick. And then came the family wedding that brought me face to face with my mother for the first time since graduation. My cousin Emily, the one my mother had always compared me to, was getting married in Indianapolis, a city conveniently located halfway between my mother's home and mine. Family obligation made declining the invitation impossible, so I found myself driving down for the weekend, anxiety mounting with each mile. The rehearsal dinner was the first time I'd seen my mother in person in over a year. She had lost weight and coloured her hair a darker shade of brown, but her eyes were the same, assessing and critical as they swept over my appearance. "Victoria," she said, offering her customary ear kiss. "That dress is an interesting choice." "Thank you," I replied, choosing to take it as a compliment. "You look well, Mom." Tyler, now 15 and nearly as tall as me, gave me a genuine hug. "Vicky, I got your birthday package. The science books were awesome." "I'm glad you liked them," I said, smiling at his enthusiasm. How's school going? As Tyler launched into stories about his classes and friends, I noticed my mother watching us with an unreadable expression. Throughout the dinner, she made several attempts to steer conversations toward my unusual career choice when speaking with relatives. Victoria works with disturbed people, she told our great-aunt Mildred. Very brave of her, though I worry about her safety. Actually, I corrected gently, I work at a trauma recovery centre helping people heal from difficult experiences. It's very rewarding work. Before my mother could respond, my cousin Emily joined us. Vicky, I heard you're going to graduate school in the fall. That's fantastic. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by her enthusiasm. And congratulations on your wedding. You look beautiful. Thanks, Emily beamed. Mum told me you've been living in Chicago. I've always loved that city. Maybe Steve and I can visit you sometime after the honeymoon. My mother's expression tightened at this evidence that Emily, her perpetual comparison point, actually admired my life choices. Emily, dear, shouldn't you be greeting the Hendersons? They just arrived. As Emily moved away, my mother turned to me. You always did know how to charm people, she said, making it sound like an accusation. I suppose that serves you well in your line of work. Genuine interest in others isn't a manipulation tactic, Mum, I replied. It's just being human. The wedding the next day was lovely, despite the undercurrent of tension between my mother and me. I sat with Tyler during the ceremony, genuinely moved by the couple's vows. At the reception, I danced with cousins I hadn't seen in years, caught up with family friends, and carefully maintained a polite distance from my mother. It wasn't until the cake had been cut and the formal festivities were winding down that the confrontation I'd been dreading finally occurred. I was chatting with one of my uncles about my graduate program when my mother joined us, champagne glass in hand. Victoria was always so bright, she said to my uncle. Top of her class in high school, she could have been anything, a doctor, a lawyer, even a CEO with her leadership skills. Mom, I said warningly, but she chose to throw it all away on psychology. My mother continued as if I hadn't spoken. All my sacrifices as a single mother, all the opportunities I created for her, and this is how she thanks me. My uncle looked uncomfortable. Well, psychology is a respectable field, Margaret, and Victoria seems happy with her choice. Happy, my mother scoffed. What does happy have to do with success with security? I took a deep breath. Uncle Bill, would you excuse us for a moment? My mother and I need to have a private conversation. He nodded gratefully and moved away. I turned to face my mother directly. This needs to stop, I said quietly but firmly. This narrative that I've somehow failed you by choosing a career that fulfills me. This constant undermining. This public criticism. I'm just stating facts, she replied defensively. I wanted more for you. No, you wanted what you wanted for me. There's a difference. I kept my voice calm. Mom, I'm good at what I do. I'm making a positive difference in people's lives. I'm financially independent. I'm happy. Why isn't that enough for you? Because I know you could have been exceptional, she hissed in. Instead, you're just ordinary. The word hung between us meant to wound, but this time I didn't feel the sting. Then I'm proud to be ordinary, I said simply, because my ordinary life is authentic and meaningful to me, and that's all that matters. My mother stared at me, seemingly at a loss for words. It might have been my imagination, but I thought I saw something shift in her eyes, some small recognition of the woman I had become. The moment was broken by Tyler appearing at our side. Mom, Aunt Susan is looking for you. Something about the gift table. My mother hesitated, then nodded. We'll continue this discussion later, Victoria. But we didn't. For the remainder of the wedding, she kept her distance, and we exchanged only the most necessary pleasantries before departing the following day. On the drive back to Chicago, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in the year since graduation. The pain of my mother's rejection was still there, a dull ache that flared occasionally, but it no longer defined me. I had built a life filled with purpose, authentic connections, and self-respect. I had learned that disapproval from one person, even a parent, didn't diminish my worth. When I arrived home at my apartment, I found a letter in my mailbox with my mother's handwriting on the envelope. With a mixture of curiosity and caution, I opened it. Victoria, it began. I cannot pretend to understand or approve of the choices you've made, but I can acknowledge that you have remained determined despite my opposition. Perhaps that strength comes from me after all. Tyler misses you. Consider visiting sometime. Margaret Porter. Not an apology, not a declaration of pride or love, but an acknowledgement of my strength, however backhanded. From my mother, it was something close to a white flag. I placed the letter in my keepsake box, neither accepting it as adequate nor rejecting the small olive branch it represented. Time would tell whether our relationship could evolve into something healthier. For now, it was enough to know that I had finally broken free of the need for her approval. My phone rang, displaying Jasmine's name. "How was the wedding from hell?" she asked when I answered. "Surprisingly educational," I replied. "I think I finally realized something important." "What's that?" "That all those times my mother told me to disappear, she was really afraid of who I might become if I fully appeared. And now that I've become myself despite her, she doesn't know what to do with me." Jasmine laughed. "That's some good therapy talking right there. Dr. Chen would be proud." "She would," I agreed, smiling. "Listen, I'm thinking of hosting a small dinner party next weekend to celebrate my grad school acceptance. You up for a trip to Chicago?" "Are you kidding? Wild horses couldn't keep me away. I'll book my train ticket tonight." As we chatted about menu plans and guest lists, I looked around my small apartment at the life I had created for myself. On my wall hung my diploma, and beside it a framed quote I had found during my darkest days in college. "What if the things that hurt you most were the very things that saved you?" My mother's words at graduation, "I wish you'd just disappear," had been meant to diminish me. Instead, they had sparked the final push I needed to fully appear, to become my most authentic self. In trying to erase me, she had inadvertently helped me define myself more clearly than ever before. Sometimes the people who hurt us most give us our greatest gifts, though never in the way they intend. My mother had taught me resilience, determination, and eventually the courage to walk away from toxicity even when it came from someone who should have loved me unconditionally. That lesson would serve me well in the years ahead, both personally and professionally. It would help me guide others through their own journeys of healing and self-discovery. It would remind me daily that our worth is inherent, not determined by others' approval. I had walked off that graduation stage broken, but I had returned stronger. I had held my head high and refused to disappear, and in doing so, I had found something more valuable than any diploma myself. It's been almost a year now since that day when my mother shouted those words at my graduation ceremony, and my life has changed in ways I never could have imagined. Looking back on that journey from humiliation to healing, I realize how many of us go through similar experiences with toxic relationships, whether with parents, partners, or friends. The initial pain was overwhelming. Walking off that stage with tears in my eyes felt like the lowest point of my life. But returning with my head held high became the first step toward true freedom. Sometimes we need to hit rock bottom before we can find the courage to climb towards something better. The hardest lesson I've learned is that some people, even parents, may never give us the love and approval we deserve. My mother still sends occasional critical texts and makes dismissive comments about my career during our infrequent phone calls. But I've stopped waiting for her to change, stopped trying to earn her approval. Instead, I've built a family of choice. My friendship with Jasmine has deepened despite the distance. Professor Davis still checks in regularly with career advice and encouragement. My colleagues at the Trauma Center have become trusted confidants. Tyler and I have developed a relationship independent of our mother, with him visiting me in Chicago during his spring break. My therapy with Dr. Chen continues to help me process my childhood and build healthier patterns. Just last week, she told me something profound. The parent who couldn't love you properly gave you the gift of understanding those who haven't been loved properly. That's why you'll be an exceptional therapist. In my work with trauma survivors, I see how our deepest wounds often become our greatest sources of empathy and insight. The very experiences that hurt us can become the foundation for helping others heal if we're brave enough to face our own pain first. I wish I could tell that terrified young woman on the graduation stage that walking off would lead to walking into a better life, that the humiliation would fade, but the strength would remain, that she would learn to parent herself with the kindness her mother never showed her. So I'll tell you instead, if you're facing someone who wishes you would disappear, who tries to dim your light or diminish your achievements, stand tall. You have every right to take up space in this world, to pursue your passions, to celebrate your victories, to be imperfectly, authentically you. What's your story? Have you ever had someone try to diminish your proudest moment? How did you respond? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Thank you for